Maybe a little too early.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Welcome back. Law and Legitimacy. Norm and Mike here, ready to break down the world, or maybe just be broken down by the world. Day 76 of United States versus Joe Biggs. And barring some sort of unforeseen catastrophe, I will be able to give the final closing argument for the defendants. There are, yesterday, the government opened, took 2+ hours. Everybody just under Merrick Garland from the Justice Department seemed to be there. The courtroom was packed, and after the government gave its closing argument, many of them didn't return. A colleague said to mine, where is everybody? I said, all the vultures from the Justice Department came out to feast over the body of the Proud Boys. You know, now they'll be back. And one of the other prosecutors heard me and looked at me and gave me a look, and I looked up and I said, yeah, that's right, vultures, you know. And then we had 2 closings from counsel for Ethan Nordine, Nick Smith out of New York City, and Carmen Hernandez as a court-appointed lawyer for Zachary from Philadelphia, gave their closing arguments. And it was an interesting contrast in style. Nick, very cerebral, professorial. Carmen, very impassioned and down to earth. This morning, Naib Hassan from Miami will give a closing argument on behalf of Enrique Terrio. And then Steve Metcalf from Baltimore and New York will close on behalf of Dominic Pizzola. And then I will close on behalf of Joe Biggs. The government will have some time for rebuttal. Hopefully they'll get it in today. And by tomorrow morning, this case should be in the hands of the jurors. I do not know what to expect in terms of a verdict or how long, but I did notice yesterday as Ms. Hernandez was giving her closing argument, she said, you know, it's been a long trial. And now we're going to give the case to you. You could be here another couple of weeks. And I all but saw the jurors recoil. And it's like, no. After 4 months, I think we've had enough.
Read the room, Liddy.
Well, I don't know. I really, you know, it's hard to read the room. The trial remains encoded in some respects. The semiotic aspect of the trial is, you know, there's a rule for jurors at which it was announced in early January. If one juror wanted to wear a mask, then they all must. So they have attended the trial each day in masks. The prosecution, to show just how other regarding they are, wears masks, but only when the jury's in the room. And most everyone else in the courtroom is unmasked other than one of the court clerks. It is what it is. You know, it is what it is. So, you know, it's been, you know, I see from the note, Mike, you know, a little too early for nostalgia, man. I don't know. I do know that once the verdict is out, or once the jury is out, I'll return to my room here and start to pack with the hope that I can get home sometime. If not in April, certainly in May. What a day yesterday, though. Forget the case. You know, I'm sitting around in court and kind of listening to the government drone on and on and on and on and on. And if I see some of these exhibits one more time, I'm going to start looking for a potato farm in Florida. I don't think you can grow potatoes in Florida, but it doesn't matter. I just need to get out of there. I look down at my phone and I see Tucker Carlson is out at Fox News. Apparently, his show on Friday was his last, and they didn't even let him come back in to give a wrap up. I guess he had about 10 minutes notice and he's out. Tucker renewed his contract in 2021 at Fox for $20 million a year. It's reported that they'll pay him that contract. I'm not sure if it's an annual contract or if it covered a couple of years. So I don't think we'll see him on the streets selling pencils anytime soon. But where he reemerges is interesting to me, and why he left is interesting to me. You know, Tucker, I can't claim that he's a buddy of mine, but we had exchanged some text messages over the weekend. I don't think he saw this coming. We were talking a little bit about January 6th and a couple other related events. And
I'd like to go fly fishing with Tucker.
Why?
Just because.
I mean, well, all right, well, we'll see if we can arrange that. But I mean, he did sort of make a comment at one point. He said, it doesn't seem like there's a whole lot of justice out there these days. So he might have known that there were tensions coming. I find it interesting because late last week, Dan Bongino formerly of Fox, was let go as well. And I thought that might have been a cost-cutting move. But I gather they weigh their money at Fox. You were telling me, Mike, they've got $1 trillion in annual revenue. Bongino is a former New York City cop, and a D's and Dems kind of guy who must have loved screaming at cabbies. Hey, you should have turned me on 42nd Street, you knucklehead.
Well, to his credit, I think Bongino is former Secret Service, so there's a little bit of a higher standard there, allegedly. Yeah, but he's definitely more of a firebrand. He kind of got forgotten in a lot of this because the news of his out came, I guess, right before the tidal wave that was the Dominion Fox settlement of the defamation claim or the defamation suit.
If you get a chance, I did see a quick clip of Bongino. He was live on air. He didn't let a beat pass before he found himself with his own podcast, and he's filming himself reading about Tucker being out, and Bongino, who could talk the ear off an elephant, is silent for a moment and stunned by it all. Why, just how Fox regroups after Tucker Carlson's departure is an interesting question. I mean, yesterday its stock plummeted by $1 billion, its book value, in the course of an afternoon. They're going to scramble to fill his seat with fill-ins until they find a new replacement. Don't know. Tucker, he's a larger than life character for some. Cernovich calls him an historic figure. He's certainly a bright guy who's got a take on things, and he's developed a large following. I suspect he'll surface again, and soon. I don't think he'll go to another right-wing news organization like One American News. I don't think the platform would be large enough.
No, not at all. No, not at all. And before we go on, we've got a ton of people in here this morning. Lots of the OG crew, Thinking Man, Lawyer Will.
Yo, Lawyer Will, what up?
BTL's here. High Society's here. It's me again, Cy. I've seen you a couple of times. Glad to have you in here as well. An Aperture of My Soul. Good morning to you.
We have somebody who's with the name Aperture of My Soul.
Come on, Norm. It's for free thinkers, contrarians, and the unafraid. Of course, we have somebody named Aperture of My Soul.
Yeah, I'm loving life.
So It's Me Again says that Fox is dead, and I want to take a moment and disagree with that statement wholesale, because Norm, I think I shared with you before, and as you were starting, you mentioned it, but I don't think that people in the live chat perhaps heard you say it. Fox does about $1 trillion in revenue, north of $1 trillion in revenue every year, and there are existing personalities on the Fox network that will fill in. Fox is fine. They just paid cash money. $787.5 million.
Well, do we know they paid? I keep seeing stories that there's going to be coverage disputes and so forth. So, I mean, I'm not sure they wrote the check. They can,
absolutely.
But
absolutely. And my only point is that Rupert Murdoch doesn't make these decisions as if he doesn't know how to manage risk, right? He's managing risk. He's probably elite at managing risk. I think that anybody in that position who has built an empire, the likes of which, CNN can't even stand in the shadow of, right? He manages risk. So yes, getting rid of Tucker is objectively a weird decision for most people. He, like I put on the screen, 3 million nightly viewers on his 8 p.m. primetime slot. Obviously one of the brightest among what I guess we can call the conservative movement, Norm, but he was a long time a libertarian. And it's only been during the Trump presidency that we've seen him move out of sort of that lockstep position with the Libertarian Party and become more of a hawk on China. He's had very strenuous objections to the policy, to Biden administration's border policy and issues on immigration. But there are some people in here in the chat who have said that Tucker, let's see, who was it? I think it was BTL or someone said, no, it's me again, said that Tucker is known for a long time. The regime would come for him. Perhaps, but I still think
he did. You passed me an interesting clip about Tucker talking about the large money interests who control the media, and how so much of what the media represents isn't so much an attempt to arrive at an objective understanding of reality, but to shape our perception of reality in the form of in terms that the interests that own the media can deal with. And it was an interesting perspective. I think your comment was, or somebody's comment who saw that clip was, did he know the handwriting was on the wall? He seemed to be chafing a little bit at the contours of the modern world in recent months. And I suspect that he will rebrand or reemerge in a different platform with perhaps a larger viewership. Because what we don't know is what he didn't feel comfortable saying while he was at Fox. He was on, to have a $20 million contract with Rupert Murdoch. Mike knows how to find me. To have that contract. But on the other hand, golden handcuffs are handcuffs nonetheless. And you sent me a couple clips, Mike, of Tucker speaking at various fora, and one of which he started to sound a semi-theological note. Talking about the presence of evil in the world and how the meta narratives of our politics, in other words, the discussions of the values that inform policy choices, have taken on a life of their own, and that in his view there really is something like a struggle between good and evil, and he may have begun to feel that from his perch at Fox News he was not aligned with goodness as he saw it. I don't know. We'll find out.
Well, I'm interested in that meta narrative as you talk about in the speech that you're referring to. I believe was at the Heritage Foundation. Is that correct? He gave, I think, over the weekend, and he talks about being Episcopalian and how shallow of a religious foundation that ultimately is, and how that actually gives him standing to make such a remark about good and evil, because he wasn't raised to be as religiously fundamentalist as some other Christian religions or sects of the Christian religion might be. Ultimately, though, I think that what Tucker is saying resonates with a lot of people, and I think that we must ask who Tucker's audience and his demographics really are. And we can probably, and we ultimately will, there's a lot of questions right now about what this means for the 2024 election and why Fox would do this at a time when it would seem as though so many of its viewers resonate with Tucker. It's so popular, and yet now we have a huge void to be filled.
Well, maybe we do, maybe we don't. But let's pivot for a moment to his alter ego at CNN, Don Lemon. I mean, yesterday was Bloody Monday in the media. Lemon is forced out of CNN after 17 years. Some say it's because he lost a sparring match with Vivek Ramaswamy a week earlier on CNN, where he went after Ramaswamy and Ramaswamy laid him out cold. Others say that he just after referring, was it to Nikki Haley as Pastor Prime, a woman who's clearly vibrant in her early 50s, I think, and known on the national scene, that he just kind of became unhinged. But here's the thought that I want to plant, the seed I want to plant. Ready? It's the Boyer Pattis Network, and we're coming out with our first show, and it's called Salt and Pepper, hosted by Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon, when they discuss the news of the day. I mean, do you think the two of them could sit in one room one day and engage in civil discourse for more than 15 minutes?
I think it would happen for one day, and they would get to 13 minutes and 47 seconds before.
No, 48.
Before Tucker made his polite exit and excused himself from whatever the damage from that conversation ultimately was. Don Lemon has been embattled for a little while. I remember watching him after the 2016 election, just drunk as hell on CNN. I don't know if you remember watching, but there was some live footage of him just completely sloshed out somewhere for, election party, the election party night, really embarrassing stuff. And since then, it's just been sort of I don't want to say a slow roll, but it has definitely been sort of a snowball effect for him. The Vivek Ramaswamy interview that you talked about on CNN, I believe last week, he had a couple of colorful comments to Vivek. One in particular was that he couldn't understand how someone of, whatever nationality, whatever you are, right? Just very flippantly.
Is that what he said?
Yeah.
Well, you're either white or genuine black, but if you come in here looking a little brown from India,
that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Who are you?
And Vivek was there to talk about the importance of what the Civil War and then what the Civil Rights Act did to secure the civil liberties for Black Americans. And Don Lemon, was just absolutely incredulous that someone that looked like Vivek, who obviously wasn't black, could sit there and lecture him about history and, point of fact for what was going on. And
that's my history. You can't talk about it.
Absolutely right. And it just sort of, that is emblematic of Don Lemon's entire demise, is that he fell victim to this victim narrative, right? To the plague that is identity politics. And I'm sure that he's a halfway intelligent guy. I'm sure that at some point in his career, he was bright-eyed and ambitious and showed a lot of promise. But whatever version of him we have right now, I think that this is a bed that he needs to lie in for a little while.
So this brings to mind a very interesting piece in the Wall Street Journal on Saturday. I think it was Richard North Patterson, an author who's publishing a new novel, or attempting to publish a new novel. He's a lawyer and he writes legal thrillers. He's done 21, I think. 16 of them have been bestsellers on the New York Times bestseller list. And so he writes another one about a trial of a young black man. And he spends a lot of time, and he's a young black man working in election law in Georgia. And I don't know what the circumstances of the trial are, but I do know that Patterson does a lot of research in his work. So he traveled to Georgia, he interviewed election workers, he interviewed poll workers, he interviewed a lot of criminal defense lawyers, all with an effort of trying to imaginatively place himself in the world of Georgia election workers, trying to understand the racial tensions that pull and push people in one direction or another. And he produces another work of fiction. It's passed around elite publishing houses through his agent, and most of them pass. And they pass because they feared that although at least one of them regarded this work as among his best work yet ever, if they were to publish it, they would be criticized because it would be a white man writing as a black man. And you just can't do that anymore. And so in his essay, he says, we've got now identitarian publishing commitments where a white man can't write about the experience of being black, but maybe a black man can write about the experience of being white, because after all, this is a world of privilege these days. And if it's hard to criticize a black person for the things that white people do. So Lemon's attitude reflects that. I commend the article. It's in the Week in Review in the Wall Street Journal. I, for one, won't miss Don Lemon, but for me to say that is a little hypocritical. I don't watch CNN, but for that matter, I don't watch Fox either. I'm aware of who these guys are because I read news feeds and I see the general discussion. Lots going on. I wondered, I'm always looking for hope, probably looking for hope in all the wrong places. But here we are spinning up to the 2024 election. And, I wondered whether the networks are feeling a little chastened, perhaps, by all of the discussion about misinformation, perhaps feeling chastened by the Dominion settlement, perhaps sensing that they've broken a contract with their viewers, and that there is a hunger for facts, that there is a hunger, if not for the quote unquote middle ground, whatever that might be, because I do imagine I do imagine Bongino, Carlson, and Lemon as at different ends of some ideological extreme. And maybe that's a false conception, but if it's not, there is a center, there is a middle ground, there is a sense in which facts neutrally discerned facts, presented facts, can govern in the marketplace of ideas. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm naive. I mean, if I had to choose, who to spend the next hour with, and it was a choice between Tucker Carlson and Don Lemon, I would choose Tucker Carlson 101% of the time. Maybe I'm not hungering for the center either. Maybe it's a false idea.
Part of me resents the fact that both of these news stories are even, juxtaposed beside one another. Because I think that Tucker Carlson is in a class of his own. I'll be very clear about that. I think a lot of him and his lifestyle is pretty transparent. He's appeared on many other shows. I'm an avid listener of Adam Carolla's content, right? So whether it's the Adam Carolla show, ACS, whether it's the Adam and Dr. Drew show, any of those things, I happen to think that Adam Carolla, for all of his obvious faults, is one of the leading thinkers in America right now, whether we're willing to admit that. And Tucker had appeared on his show for a one-on-one interview. And I think actually Adam went to Tucker's place to do that. And Tucker talked a lot about his lifestyle, his meditation, what he does every day. You know, he doesn't wear socks. He doesn't own a TV, these other things. And he's thinking deeply.
Hi, I'm your Fox News analyst, and I don't watch television.
Right. Which I mean is again, like I get how those as somewhat counterintuitive, but he writes his show every day, and he talks about, you know, he's thinking deeply about the issues plaguing the American Republic as we know it today. And I think that if there's anybody who has an opportunity to branch off on his own, I'm not really entertaining any of the ideas that perhaps Tucker Carlson becomes part of Donald Trump's ticket. I think that that's silly. I think that that Tucker could carry his own ticket, and that maybe is some insight into the esteem or the regard that I have for him. But I'm worried that the void that is created by the likes of Tucker leaving Fox means something more about what we are going to see in the upcoming election. Because if mainstream media, like you're sort of indicating here, Norm, are taking cues from one another as to what types of content and how they're going to steer their programming toward the middle, it seems obvious to me that they have just put someone the size of Tucker on the outside of that Overton window.
Well, let's find out. One thing we know he won't be doing, and that is preparing Joe Biden for his presidential debates. Washington is abuzz this morning. Biden did it. He declared for 2024. And the Democratic National Committee is already promising that there will be no debates in 2024. And, you know, I find that somewhat offensive. I understand that Biden is the candidate, and that a presumption is that a candidate seeking re-election doesn't have to primary, that the party will rally behind him. But I think the Republic in general would benefit from presidential debates. And Biden never really ran a robust candidacy in 2020. He ran the so-called basement campaign, you know, for fear that he would contract COVID. But in reality, I think his campaign was, look, I'm not Donald Trump. And maybe that'll work again in 2024 if Trump, you know, manages to survive his legal hurdles, and can win the confidence of enough members of his party to be the nominee. It certainly appears at this point like it would be a rematch in 2024 of Trump versus Biden. But my view is debates are good. I mean, you were just talking about the Overton window, Mike, and the media sort of compressing us into this sort of soporific middle in which all cows are gray, and what's the difference between Tweedledum and Tweedledee. I would like to see Biden on stage against Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Or whoever else decides that they want to be the Democratic Party's nominee. The fact of the matter is that come sometime soon, we're going to have leadership in the Democrat Party and in the Republican Party other than Donald Trump and Joe Biden. And candidly, I'm not interested in a rematch of the 2020 election. I'm watching the Biden administration unroll a series of policies by administrative fiat that candidly I don't support. I mean, the notion that somehow those of us or those who have better credit scores are going to pay a little bit more on their mortgage insurance to subsidize those with poorer credit scores, that's a prelude to sort of social engineering or social credit scoring that gives administrators the decision to weight what we pay on a transactional basis in various marketplaces, depending on their idea of the good. And that was the promise of the Biden administration. I think of this as warm-ups for the inevitable reparations discussion that we're going to have in this country and are having at various points around the country. So, shame on the Democratic National Committee for saying there will not be primary debates in 2024. Good luck, Joe. Try to...
Let me read this from the New York Post, because I want to ask you a question at the end of this blurb. But the New York Post runs this quote: according to the NBC News poll, more than half of Democrats and 70% of Americans don't want Biden to run for re-election. His age, of course, is the leading reason. It doesn't take a gerontologist to realize that an 80-year-old man and the most demanding job on the planet aren't a natural match. The White House clearly understands this as well. Biden is carefully stage managed and sometimes awkwardly reminded of his cues by people with him at an event. His interactions with the media are limited, and this isn't a press that is out to get him, but one incredibly sympathetic and accommodating. Biden broke with tradition by not holding a press conference while he was on his trip to Ireland. He's done 54 interviews so far in his first 2 years, the fewest since Ronald Reagan. He has averaged 10 news conferences a year, whereas Calvin Coolidge, Silent Cal, did about 90 annually during his first 2 years in office. So my question for you, Norm, and I've seen this written in a couple of places, does the Democrat Party have an issue of voter suppression if the DNC, which holds all the political capital for that party, decides that they're not going to open the primary election season for a debate like you were just talking about? And is that a ratification and sort of their underwriting of all of the policies, both domestic and geopolitical, that this administration has brought forth? And especially in the case because Susan Rice is on her way out as well. She was the domestic policy advisor as well as the foreign policy advisor for the administration for these first 2 years. What exactly is the Democrat Party? If you're a Democrat voter, which I don't know that we're talking to a ton of them here on this stream, but if you're the Democrat voter, are you, and you see the poll where 70% of Americans don't want him to run again? What is this saying? To me, I think I sent a note to you yesterday via text and said, in my opinion, this is the biggest issue as it relates to federal election integrity.
Well, I don't know what you mean in the question by voter suppression. I mean, the parties are what they are. They are organizations that are designed to win elections.
Well, let me ask you this then.
No, but I mean, what do you mean by voter suppression? We get what you get what you bargain for. And so if this is how the Democrats believe they stand the best chance to win the White House, I believe that they are tactically within their rights to make this decision. I can be offended by it as a voter. I can want to see more of this Oz-like figure who's managed in the White House and manages on the occasions in which I see him in public often to stumble and shamble like someone who doesn't look like he's at full command of himself. But isn't that what parties do?
Well, we saw what happened to Bernie Sanders in 2016, right? All I'm saying is that if the DNC is meddling in the ability for those who have a legitimate chance to contend for the highest office in our land, and they're putting their political capital and power and resources behind someone who is at historic lows for public appearances, for interviews, right? Who can't
and public confidence. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, what are we dealing with here from the Democrat side of the aisle? And is this an indication of something a little more sinister than what we've been allowed to talk about for the last 5 or 6 years?
Well, I don't know.
This is sort of a shadow campaign of something else, right? We just had Fox News, which does $1 trillion in revenue, get rid of its most productive on-air anchor, doing 3 million nightly views, settling a defamation lawsuit for $787.5 million, getting rid of Dan Bongino, right? And they still have to do away with this other Smartmatic lawsuit case, right? So ahead of their election, it's like they're not even really preparing for any sort of aggressive coverage of what's to come. But it's not even like there's going to be anything for them to report on because it doesn't appear as though Biden is going to make it a priority to even come out of his house.
There's a fabulous book that political science nerds used to read called Critical Elections as the Mainstream of American Politics, or something like that. It's Walter Dean Burnham. And his argument was that every 40 years or so, the parties run out of steam. That is, whatever interests they harnessed and energy they managed to direct into the polling place gets reconfigured by changes in American lives, and parties realign. You saw this with Democrats, turning to the Republican Party in the Deep South in the wake of the Civil Rights Movement. And it could be that the Democrat Party and the Republican Party are both running out of steam, and that they're producing these geriatric dinosaurs in a highly managed fashion to give us a choice between, Tweedledum and Tweedledee in the senior center, while other aspirants don't have the ability to even get the stage. So I'm looking at this picture you've got of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. His job as a politician aspiring to national leadership is to realign, I think, voters. And if he believes that he can't get the stage he wants in the Democrat Party, maybe he should switch aisles and go to the Republican Party.
If he can, awesome, right?
But
Yeah.
yeah, if he can't do either, then maybe it's time to form a new party or take a voter block to another party. So my sense is, given the malaise in America right now and the sense of hyper partisanship and the divides, and the refreshing phenomena of Vivek Ramaswamy, who manages to talk about spiritual aspirations, the need for leadership, a desire for community, things that I believe are constant in the human psyche. It may be that what we're seeing is a prelude to realignment. And I would hope that those in the Democrat Party who are inclined to think that whatever the DNC wants is good would push back some on no primaries and say that, hey, you can't run on anybody but Trump again in 2024. You need to run on a vision of America, and those visions get played out and explored in national debates and primaries. And by failing to hold them, we're failing, I would hope people would say, to appeal to a new generation of Americans, and we're taking their loyalty for granted, and that's not good for the country. So
and the only person on the conservative side of the political aisle saying anything like that is Vivek Ramaswamy, and he's doing the dirty work. He's going to the CNNs and doing interviews. He's as visible as you can possibly be, and yet I think he was polling a couple of weeks ago at where Donald Trump was when he first came down the escalator of Trump Tower, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that both parties have this exact problem, and I think Thinking Man, you've credit to you, you've been astute on this point for several streams that I can recall, where it seems more and more as though there is some sort of unified effort, but and sort of an illusion of choice as it relates to Democrat versus Republican. I'm really disheartened by this news, but I do recommend this Breitbart article to anybody who has a few minutes to spare. It talks about the importance, because one thing that's being buried in this, and I know we got to go, Norm, and you got to get and do some important work.
Objection.
There in trial. The last thing I'll say, the DNC has also elected to move the first primary to South Carolina rather than New Hampshire, and there's some historical background that I think is really interesting that Breitbart digs up on this issue, and perhaps we can continue with a little bit of that tomorrow.
Yeah, presidential politics, I guess, are going to be a thing. We've got that 4-year drama of reelecting or electing a president. And off we go into the wild blue yonder. I don't know what the future holds. It's odd to me that we've got, the seemingly ageless Donald Trump, who can consume more cheeseburgers, pizza, and junk food than any man over the age of 70 should, and still live, and without losing a sense of vitality.
And losing weight, man. He's got a nice line now.
And then we've got that slim Joe Biden who can mumble his way through a bowl of oatmeal. I mean, wonders never cease. So anyhow, objection. Last day of the trial.
Overruled, Norm Pattis.
So I will be giving closing arguments this afternoon. Tomorrow morning when we return, I'll probably have a load off my shoulders, and I'll have to have a seatbelt on to keep from hitting the ceiling. And we'll return with Law and Legitimacy then.
Sounds good, Norm. Go get them today. And thank you for everybody for tuning in. Those of you that listen audio only, we appreciate you. If you're over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, or Google Play, rate us 5 stars. Leave a nice comment. Offset some of those trolls that go over there because they don't like Norm because of his work for Alex Jones. We need to protect people like Norm and honor them.
No, we don't. Now, here's my message to the trolls. Enjoy some safe sex. Go fuck yourselves. Right?
I love that energy. See you tomorrow, Norm.
Bye.